Heavenly Father, thank you for this moment and for everyone watching this message. As we hear this story today, open our hearts to understand your truth. Fill us with faith where there is fear and strength where there is weakness. Remind us that no matter how big our problems may seem, you are always greater. Just as you were with David, be with us in every battle we face. Help us to trust you, to stand strong, and to walk in faith every day. Let this message bring hope, courage, and peace to our hearts. In a world filled with fear, one young boy chose to stand in faith. When an entire army trembled before a giant, one shepherd stepped forward without fear. This is not just a story of battle. This is a story of courage, trust, and the power of God. The story of David and Goliath. A story that reminds us that no giant is greater than God, and no challenge is too big when faith leads the way. The battlefield of fear. The valley stretched wide and silent as two mighty armies stood facing each other across the battlefield, waiting for a battle that had not yet begun. On one side stood the army of Israel, chosen by God, yet weakened by fear and uncertainty deep within their hearts. On the other side stood the Philistines, bold, confident, and ready to fight, trusting in their strength and their warriors. From among them came a giant, a man whose presence alone struck terror into every soul who saw him. His name was Goliath, a champion feared by many and respected by all his people. His armor was heavy and shining, crafted with skill, and his spear looked like a weapon no ordinary man could even lift. Each morning and each evening, he stepped forward into the open space between the armies and shouted his challenge. His voice echoed like thunder across the valley, shaking the courage of every soldier who heard him speak. "Choose a man to fight me," he declared, mocking and defying the people of the living God without fear. But no one answered him. Not even the bravest among them dared to step forward and accept the challenge. King Saul himself, though once strong, now stood silent, overwhelmed by the size and power of the giant before him. The soldiers whispered among themselves, their confidence fading more and more with each passing day. They forgot the victories God had given them in the past, and instead focused only on the danger in front of them. Fear slowly took control of their minds, replacing faith and courage with doubt and weakness. And so the battlefield, which should have been a place of victory, became a place where fear ruled over faith. A shepherd boy arrives. Far away from the noise of war and the fear of the battlefield, a young shepherd boy was faithfully tending his father's sheep in the quiet fields. His name was David, a simple boy with no armor, no title, and no reputation among soldiers. He was not trained for battle, nor was he known for strength in the eyes of men. But his heart was full of trust in God. Day after day, he cared for the sheep, protecting them from danger and learning to rely on God in every situation. When wild animals came to attack, David did not run away, but stood firm, trusting that God would help him. Through these hidden battles, God was preparing him for something far greater than he could imagine. One day, his father called him and gave him a simple task: to take food to his brothers who were fighting in the army. David obeyed immediately, without hesitation, and began his journey toward the battlefield. As he arrived, he saw the tents, the soldiers, and the tension that filled the air around him. Then he heard the voice of the giant echoing once again, bold and full of pride. He watched as the soldiers reacted with fear, stepping back and refusing to face the challenge. But something inside David was different from everyone else around him. Where others saw a reason to fear, David saw a moment for faith to rise. He could not understand why no one stood up for the honor of God. And in that moment, a shepherd boy began to see what others could not see. faith begins to rise. As David stood among the soldiers, listening to the words of the giant, a fire began to grow within his heart. He was not moved by fear like the others, but by a deep sense of faith and boldness that came from knowing God. He remembered the times when he was alone in the fields, facing danger with nothing but his trust in the Lord. When a lion came to attack the sheep, God gave him the strength and courage to overcome it. When a bear rose against him, God again delivered him and protected what was in his care. Those moments were not small or meaningless. They were part of God's plan to prepare him for this very day. Now, standing before a giant, David understood that this was another battle where God would show his power. He refused to see the giant as too big to defeat, but instead saw him as someone who dared to challenge God. While others focused on the size of the enemy, David focused on the greatness of his God. He spoke with confidence, asking why no one had stepped forward to defend the honor of the Lord. People around him were surprised by his boldness and questioned his understanding. But David was not speaking from pride. He was speaking from faith. He knew that victory does not depend on human strength or experience. It depends on trusting in God completely, even when the situation seems impossible. And so, in the middle of fear, faith began to rise through a young shepherd boy. A bold decision. David's words began to spread among the soldiers until they reached the ears of the king himself. King Saul called for David, curious and uncertain about this young boy who spoke with such courage. When David stood before him, he did not show fear or hesitation in his voice or in his eyes. Instead, he spoke with calm confidence, declaring that he would fight the giant. Saul looked at him and saw only youth, inexperience, and weakness compared to the mighty warrior. He questioned how such a young shepherd could possibly stand against a trained fighter like the giant. But David began to explain, not boasting about himself, but testifying about God's faithfulness. He spoke of the lion and the bear, and how God had delivered him from their attacks. He made it clear that the same God who saved him before would save him again. David did not rely on his own strength, but on the power of the living God. Saul listened carefully, slowly beginning to understand the faith that filled this young boy's heart. Though still unsure, he gave David permission to go and fight. He even offered his own armor, hoping it would protect him in battle. But this battle would not be won by human strength or heavy protection. It would be won by faith that trusted completely in God. Trust not in armor. Saul placed his armor on David, covering him with a helmet and a coat meant for a warrior. The armor was strong and heavy, designed for battle, and worn by kings and soldiers. But as David tried to move, he felt uncomfortable and restricted by its weight. It was not made for him, and it did not feel right upon his body. He realized that he could not fight in something he was not used to. More importantly, he knew that his victory would not come from armor or weapons. So David made a bold choice. He removed the armor and laid it aside. This decision may have looked foolish in the eyes of others watching him. A young boy going into battle without protection seemed unthinkable and dangerous. But David was not trusting in what he could wear or carry. He was trusting in God, who had never failed him before. He took his staff in his hand, the same one he used while tending sheep. Then he went to a stream and carefully chose 5 smooth stones. With his sling in hand, he prepared for battle in the simplest way. Because true strength does not come from armor, it comes from faith in God. Walking toward the giant. As David stepped onto the battlefield, all eyes were fixed upon him in silence and disbelief. The soldiers watched, wondering how this young boy could dare to face such a powerful enemy. Across the field stood Goliath, waiting with confidence and pride. When he saw David approaching, he was filled with anger and amusement at the same time. He laughed loudly, mocking the boy who came against him without sword or armor. To him, David was nothing more than a child, weak and unworthy of battle. But David did not stop, and he did not turn back in fear. Step by step, he walked forward with calm and steady faith in his heart. Each step was a declaration that he trusted God more than he feared the giant. The distance between them grew smaller, and the moment of confrontation came closer. The air was heavy with tension, and the outcome seemed impossible to predict. Yet David's heart remained at peace, knowing that God was with him. He was not walking alone into battle. He was walking with divine purpose. This was not just a fight between two people, but a moment that would reveal God's power. And with unwavering faith, David moved forward to face the giant. The confrontation. As the distance closed, the moment of confrontation finally arrived between the young shepherd and the mighty giant. Goliath looked down at David with anger, pride, and deep insult. He could not believe that Israel had sent a mere boy to fight against him. His pride was wounded, and his voice rose with fury as he mocked David openly. "Am I a dog, that you come to me with sticks?" He shouted with scorn and laughter. He cursed David and spoke words meant to bring fear into his heart. The giant threatened to destroy him and leave his body for the birds of the air. The soldiers watching held their breath, expecting David to tremble or turn back. But David did not move in fear, nor did he show any sign of doubt. Instead, he stood firm, his eyes focused, his heart steady with faith. This was not just a meeting of two fighters, but a clash between fear and faith. The giant stood tall in physical strength, but empty of true power. David stood small in size, but filled with the presence of God. The battlefield grew silent as heaven itself seemed to watch this moment unfold. And in that silence, something powerful was about to be spoken. Words of faith. David lifted his voice, not with fear, but with boldness that came from deep faith in God. He looked at the giant and spoke words that would echo far beyond that battlefield. "You come against me with sword and spear," he said, calm and unshaken. "But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." These were not just words. They were a declaration of complete trust in God. David was not relying on weapons, skill, or human strength to win this battle. He was placing everything in the hands of the living God. He continued, declaring that this very day the Lord would give him victory. He spoke with certainty, not doubt, believing fully in what God would do. The giant listened, but did not understand the power behind those words. To him, they sounded like foolish confidence from a young boy. But to those with faith, they were words filled with truth and authority. David was not trying to prove himself. He was pointing to God. This battle was no longer about David and Goliath alone. It had become a moment where God's power would be revealed to all. The moment of action. Without hesitation, David began to move, turning his words of faith into action on the battlefield. He did not wait for the giant to strike first or give himself time to feel fear. Instead, he ran forward with courage that surprised everyone watching. Quickly, he reached into his bag and took out one of the smooth stones. With practiced hands, he placed it into his sling, ready for the moment. This simple weapon, small and ordinary, was all he carried into battle. But in the hands of faith, even the smallest thing can become powerful. David swung the sling with precision, guided by confidence and trust in God. The stone was released, flying through the air with speed and purpose. In that brief moment, everything seemed to slow down as the stone moved forward. The giant stood tall, unaware of how quickly his fate was approaching. The soldiers watched in silence, unable to look away from what was happening. This was the turning point, the moment where faith would meet reality. Not by strength, not by power, but by the will of God. And in a single instant, everything changed. The giant falls. The stone struck Goliath directly on the forehead with perfect accuracy and force. It was a small stone, yet it carried the power of God behind it. The giant's expression changed in a moment, from pride to shock. His strength failed him, and his massive body began to fall forward. The ground shook as he collapsed, defeated before the eyes of both armies. Silence filled the battlefield, as no one could believe what had just happened. The mighty warrior, feared by all, had been brought down by a shepherd boy, not by sword, not by spear, but by faith in God alone. David stood there, not in pride, but in the victory that God had given him. Fear that once filled the hearts of Israel was suddenly broken. The impossible had become possible in a single moment. God had shown his power in a way no one could deny. What seemed like weakness had overcome what seemed unbeatable. The name of the Lord was lifted high through this victory, and the fall of the giant became a testimony that would never be forgotten. Fear turns to courage. For a moment, the entire battlefield stood in complete silence, as if time itself had paused to witness what had just happened. Then slowly, the reality of the giant's fall began to sink into the hearts of the soldiers watching. The fear that once held the army of Israel captive started to break apart. Their eyes, once filled with doubt, now began to shine with hope and courage. They realized that the giant they feared was no longer standing before them. What seemed impossible had been made possible through faith in God. Strength began to rise within them, replacing the fear that had controlled them for so long. A new boldness filled their hearts, pushing them forward instead of holding them back. The victory of David became a spark that ignited courage in everyone around him. They remembered who their God was, the God who fights for his people. No longer did they see themselves as weak or defeated. Instead, they saw the power of God working through even the smallest among them. Fear lost its grip, and faith began to take its place. The atmosphere of the battlefield completely changed in that moment, and what began in fear was now turning into victory and courage. The enemy flees. As the Philistine army saw their champion fall, shock and panic spread quickly among their ranks. Their confidence, once strong and unshakable, began to crumble before their eyes. The one they trusted for victory was now lying defeated on the ground. Fear entered their hearts just as it had once filled the Israelites. They realized that this battle was no longer in their control. Without their giant, they felt exposed, weak, and vulnerable. One by one, they began to step back, unsure of what to do next. Then suddenly, their retreat turned into a full escape as fear took over. They began to run from the battlefield, abandoning their position. The army of Israel saw this and seized the moment with boldness. They rose with strength and chased after their enemies with renewed courage. The same people who once trembled in fear were now moving forward in victory. God had turned the situation completely around. What once seemed like defeat became a powerful triumph, and the enemy who once threatened them now fled in fear. A victory remembered. The story of that day did not end on the battlefield, but continued to live on in the hearts of the people. It became a testimony of what God can do when someone trusts Him completely. The victory was not just about defeating a giant, but about restoring faith in God. People began to speak of the courage of David and the power of the Lord. His name spread throughout the land, not for his strength, but for his faith. This moment marked the beginning of something greater in David's life. God had chosen him for a purpose far beyond what anyone could see at that time. The victory reminded everyone that God does not look at outward appearance. He looks at the heart and the faith within a person. What seemed like a small act became a powerful story for generations to come. Parents would tell their children about the day the giant fell. Leaders would remember it as a lesson in trusting God. It became a symbol of hope for anyone facing impossible situations. A reminder that no challenge is too great when God is involved. And the story continued to inspire faith long after the battle was over. The lesson of faith. The story of David and Goliath is more than just a battle. It is a message for every generation. It teaches that fear will always try to stand in the way of faith. There will always be giants in life that seem too big to overcome. They may come in the form of problems, struggles, or moments of doubt. At times, they may make us feel small, weak, and unprepared. But this story reminds us that we are never alone in our battles. God is always present, ready to fight for those who trust Him. Just like David, we may not have the strength the world expects. We may not have the tools others rely on. But what truly matters is our faith in God. When we trust Him, even the smallest effort can lead to great victory. When we stand firm, fear begins to lose its power over us. And when we move forward in faith, God works in ways we cannot imagine. This story calls us to rise above fear and walk in trust. Because with God, every giant can fall. When fear feels bigger than faith. There are moments in life when fear seems louder than faith and stronger than hope within us. Just like the army on that battlefield, we sometimes feel surrounded by challenges we cannot overcome. The giants we face may not be physical, but they are real and powerful in our minds. They come as fear, doubt, anxiety, failure, and uncertainty about the future. These giants stand before us, reminding us of our weaknesses again and again. They try to convince us that we are not strong enough to win. They make us forget the times God has helped us before. They fill our hearts with hesitation and hold us back from moving forward. But just like in that valley, fear only grows when faith is silent. The longer we listen to fear, the stronger it becomes in our lives. Yet even in those moments, God is still present and watching over us. He sees our struggles and understands our battles. He knows the giants we face and the fears we carry inside. And just like before, He is ready to help us overcome. All He is waiting for is a heart that chooses to trust Him. God uses the unexpected. When people looked at David, they saw a young shepherd, not a warrior prepared for battle. He did not look like someone who could defeat a giant or lead an army. He had no armor, no title, and no position of importance among the people. But God does not choose people based on what others see on the outside. He looks deeper into the heart, where true strength is found. God saw David's faith, his courage, and his willingness to trust completely. While others doubted him, God had already chosen him for this moment. This reminds us that God often works through the most unexpected people. He uses those who are willing, not those who seem perfect. You may feel small, unnoticed, or unimportant in the eyes of others. But that does not limit what God can do through your life. He can take your weakness and turn it into strength. He can use your situation to reveal His power. All He asks is that you trust Him and step forward in faith. Because with God, the unexpected becomes unstoppable. The power of small things. David did not go into battle with a sword, a shield, or heavy armor like other warriors. Instead, he carried something simple, a sling, and a few smooth stones from a stream. To others, these tools seemed too small and too weak for such a great battle. No one would have believed that such simple things could defeat a giant. But God often uses what seems small to accomplish something great. It was not the size of the stone that mattered, but the power behind it. When God is involved, even the smallest effort becomes powerful. This teaches us that we do not need everything to be perfect before we act. We do not need the best resources or the strongest abilities. We only need to be willing to use what we have with faith. God can multiply and strengthen what we place in His hands. What seems insignificant to us can become a tool for victory. Just like that stone, your small step of faith can make a big difference. Never underestimate what God can do through simple obedience. Because in God's hands, small things can change everything. Faith requires action. David did not just speak words of faith, he acted on them without hesitation. He did not stand still, waiting for something to happen on its own. Instead, he stepped forward and moved toward the giant with courage. Faith is not just believing in our hearts, it is also acting on that belief. It requires us to move even when we feel uncertain or afraid. It calls us to trust God enough to take the next step. If David had stayed where he was, nothing would have changed. The giant would still be standing, and fear would still control the people. But his willingness to act made all the difference. Sometimes we wait too long, hoping fear will disappear on its own. But victory often comes when we choose to move forward despite fear. God honors those who step out in faith and trust Him completely. Even when the outcome is unknown, He is already in control. Faith opens the door for God to work in powerful ways. And when we act in faith, we begin to see miracles happen. God fights for you. The battle between David and the giant was not just about skill or strength. It was a demonstration of what happens when God fights for His people. David understood that he was not alone in that moment. He knew that God was with him, guiding every step he took. That is why he was not afraid, even when facing something so overwhelming. God does not expect us to fight our battles alone. He invites us to trust Him and rely on His power instead of our own. When we face difficulties, He stands with us in every situation. He gives us strength when we feel weak and courage when we feel afraid. Just like on that battlefield, God is still working in our lives today. He is still able to defeat the giants that stand in our way. No problem is too big, and no situation is too difficult for Him. When we place our trust in Him, we are never fighting alone. His presence brings peace even in the middle of chaos, and His power brings victory where defeat once seemed certain. Stand firm in faith. The story of David reminds us that faith is not about feeling strong all the time. It is about choosing to trust God even when we feel weak inside. There will always be moments when life feels overwhelming and uncertain. There will always be challenges that test our courage and our belief. But in those moments, we must remember who God is. He is greater than any problem we will ever face. He is stronger than any fear that tries to hold us back. He is faithful, even when we struggle to believe. Just like David stood firm before the giant, we are called to stand firm in our faith, not because we are strong, but because God is with us. When we refuse to give in to fear, we begin to see things differently. We begin to see possibilities where there once seemed to be none. Faith changes the way we see our situation. It gives us hope, strength, and confidence to move forward. And when we stand firm in faith, victory will follow. Remember what God has done. In moments of fear, it is easy to forget the times when God has already helped us in the past. Just like many on the battlefield, we often focus more on our problems than on God's power. But David chose to remember and that memory gave him strength. He remembered the lion, the bear, and every moment God had been faithful to him. Those memories were not just stories, they were proof that God was with him. When we remember what God has done, our faith begins to rise again. We are reminded that He has never failed us before. Every past victory becomes a foundation for present courage. Instead of looking at how big the problem is, we begin to see how great God is. Fear loses its power when we focus on God's faithfulness. Our confidence grows when we remember His promises. God has already worked in your life more than you realize. Those moments are there to strengthen you in difficult times. Hold on to them and let them remind you of His power. Because the same God who helped you before will help you again. Your battle has a purpose. The battle David faced was not random or meaningless in his life. It was part of a greater purpose that God had already planned for him. Every challenge we face also carries a purpose, even when we cannot see it. Difficult moments often prepare us for something greater ahead. They shape our character and strengthen our faith in ways nothing else can. If David had never faced danger before, he may not have been ready for the giant. In the same way, your struggles are preparing you for your future. God uses every situation to build something inside you. Even when it feels hard, He is working behind the scenes. Your battle is not just about overcoming a problem. It is about becoming stronger, wiser, and closer to God. Sometimes the struggle is necessary for the growth that follows. And when you look back, you will understand why it happened. Trust that your situation has meaning, even if it is not clear now. Because God never allows a battle without a purpose. Do not compare yourself. Many people may have looked at David and compared him to other warriors on the battlefield. He was smaller, younger, and less experienced than anyone else around him. By human standards, he did not seem qualified to face the giant. But David did not compare himself to others. He trusted in God instead. Comparison often leads to doubt and discouragement in our lives. It makes us feel like we are not good enough or strong enough. But God has created each of us uniquely for a reason. He does not expect you to be like someone else. He calls you to be faithful in your own journey. Your strength may not look like someone else's strength. Your path may not be the same as others around you. But that does not make you less capable in God's eyes. What matters is your faith, not your comparison. When you stop comparing, you start trusting God more. And that is where true confidence begins to grow. Speak faith, not fear. When David faced the giant, he did not speak words of fear or defeat. Instead, he spoke with boldness and confidence in what God would do. His words reflected his faith, not the situation around him. What we speak has the power to influence how we think and feel. If we constantly speak fear, it begins to grow stronger inside us. But when we speak faith, it strengthens our spirit and our mindset. David declared victory even before the battle was over. He believed in God's power before he saw the result. This is what it means to live by faith. We do not wait for proof. We trust in God first. Speaking faith does not mean ignoring reality. It means choosing to believe that God is greater than reality. Our words can either build us up or bring us down. Choose to speak life, hope, and trust in every situation. Because faith begins not only in the heart, but also in our words. God sees your heart. While others looked at David and saw only a young boy, God saw something much deeper. He saw a heart that was willing to trust Him completely. He saw courage where others saw weakness. God does not judge us based on appearance or ability. He looks at what is inside, the faith, the trust, and the willingness to follow Him. You may feel unnoticed or overlooked by people around you. You may feel like others do not recognize your potential. But God sees everything that others cannot see. He knows your heart, your struggles, and your desire to grow. He values your faith more than your achievements. He cares about your trust more than your strength. And He is always ready to use those who are willing. You do not have to prove yourself to the world. You only need to stay faithful to God. Because when God sees your heart, He knows exactly how to use you. The beginning of something greater. The victory over the giant was not the end of David's story. It was only the beginning. This moment opened the door to a greater purpose that God had planned for his life. What seemed like a single battle became a turning point in his journey. Sometimes, one step of faith can change everything. One decision to trust God can lead to something far greater than we imagine. David did not know what the future held at that moment, but he chose to trust God, and that trust led him forward. In the same way, your story is still being written. The challenges you face today are not the end of your journey. They may be the beginning of something new and powerful. God is working in your life, even when you cannot see it clearly. He is leading you toward a purpose greater than your current situation. Every step of faith you take brings you closer to that purpose. Do not give up, even when things feel uncertain, because what God starts, He will always complete. When you feel unqualified, there are times in life when you may feel unqualified for the challenges in front of you. You may feel like you don't have enough strength, knowledge, or experience to succeed. Just like David, you may wonder why you are in this situation at all. Others may doubt you, and their words may make you question yourself. But feeling unqualified does not mean you are unchosen. God often calls people who feel unready so they can rely fully on Him. If you had everything you needed, you might not depend on God. But in your weakness, His strength becomes more visible. Your limitations are not obstacles to God, they are opportunities. They allow His power to work through you in ways you cannot imagine. You don't need to have everything figured out before you begin. You only need to trust God with what you have right now. He will guide you step by step through every challenge. And what feels impossible today will become your testimony tomorrow. Because God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Do not listen to doubt. When David spoke with confidence, not everyone supported him or believed in him. Some questioned his intentions, while others doubted his ability to succeed. Even those closest to him did not fully understand his faith. Doubt can come from many places: people, situations, and even our own thoughts. It whispers that we are not enough and that we should give up. If David had listened to those voices, he would have never stepped forward. But he chose to focus on God instead of the opinions around him. He did not allow doubt to control his decisions. In life, you will always hear voices that try to discourage you. They will tell you that your goals are too big or your strength is too small. But you must choose which voice you listen to. The voice of fear leads to inaction, but the voice of faith leads to victory. God's voice will always guide you toward courage and trust. When you silence doubt, you create space for faith to grow. God works in silence. Before the giant fell, there was a moment of silence on the battlefield. Everything seemed still, as if nothing was happening at all. But in that silence, God was already at work behind the scenes. Not every miracle is loud or visible at the beginning. Sometimes, God moves quietly, preparing everything at the right time. We often expect immediate results, but God's timing is always perfect. He sees what we cannot see and understands what we do not understand. Even when it feels like nothing is changing, God is still working. The silence does not mean absence, it means preparation. Just like the moment before the stone was released, something powerful was coming. You may be in a season where everything feels quiet and uncertain, but do not lose hope during that time. Trust that God is aligning everything for your breakthrough. When the moment comes, everything will change in an instant. Because God's power is never late, it arrives exactly on time. One moment can change everything. The battle between David and the giant was decided in a single moment. It did not take hours or days for the outcome to be revealed. Just one action, one step of faith, changed everything completely. Life can be like that sometimes. One moment can shift everything. One decision, one prayer, or one step of courage can transform your situation. We often think change must be slow, but God can move suddenly. He can turn defeat into victory in ways we never expected. What seems impossible for a long time can change in an instant. That is the power of God working in our lives. David's moment came when he chose to act in faith. Your moment will come too, at the right time. All you need to do is be ready and willing to trust God. Do not give up before your moment arrives, because when it comes, it will change everything, and you will see that God was working all along. From fear to faith. At the beginning of the story, the battlefield was filled with fear and uncertainty. The soldiers stood back, unable to move forward because of what they saw. Fear had taken control, and it seemed impossible to overcome. But everything changed when faith entered the situation. Through one person, faith began to spread and replace fear. What once felt overwhelming became something that could be defeated. This is the power of faith. It changes the atmosphere around us. It shifts our focus from problems to possibilities. It reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles. Just like that day, your situation can also change. What begins in fear can end in victory. What seems impossible can become possible through faith. God can turn your story around in ways you never imagined. All it takes is one step of trust to begin the change. And when faith rises, fear has no place to remain. Keep moving forward. David did not stop halfway to the giant, and he did not turn back when things became intense. He continued moving forward, step by step, until the victory was complete. This teaches us an important lesson about perseverance. Sometimes the hardest part is not starting, but continuing. We may begin with faith, but challenges can make us want to stop. Difficult moments can test our patience and our determination. But giving up will only delay the victory that is ahead. We must keep moving, even when progress feels slow. Every step forward brings us closer to where we need to be. God honors those who remain faithful through every stage. Even when the path is unclear, He is guiding each step. Do not let fear or doubt stop your progress. Stay focused on the promise, not the problem. Keep trusting, keep believing, and keep going. Because the journey of faith always leads to victory. The battle belongs to God. The moment David stepped onto the battlefield, he was not relying on his own strength or ability. He understood something deeper than most people around him could see. This battle did not belong to him, it belonged to God. That truth changed everything about how he approached the giant. When we realize that our battles are not ours alone, fear begins to lose its grip. We stop depending only on ourselves and start depending on God's power. This is where true victory begins, in surrender, not in struggle. David knew that he was only an instrument in God's hand. The real strength was not in the sling, the stone, or even in his courage. The real strength was in the one who was with him. God had already gone before him into the battle. God had already prepared the outcome before the fight even began. David simply walked in obedience to what God had already decided. When we surrender our battles to God, we step into His victory. And what looks like our fight becomes His testimony. Courage in action. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. David did not wait for fear to disappear before taking action. He moved forward even while the situation looked dangerous and uncertain. Every step he took was an act of courage and trust in God. The giant did not become smaller, but David's faith became stronger. True courage is revealed in moments when everything feels impossible. It is easy to believe when everything is calm and safe. But real faith is shown when you stand firm in the storm. David's courage was not based on emotions, but on conviction. He believed that God was greater than what stood before him. That belief pushed him forward when others stayed frozen in fear. Courage begins when you decide not to let fear control you anymore. It grows each time you choose faith over doubt, and it becomes powerful when you trust God completely. That is the courage that changes battles. The final step. There comes a moment in every battle when you must take the final step forward. David reached that moment as he stood face to face with the giant. There was no turning back, no retreat, and no hesitation left. Everything led to this single moment of action and faith. He reached into his bag, selected the stone, and prepared the sling. The world around him seemed silent, holding its breath in anticipation. All eyes were fixed on what would happen next. This was the moment where faith meets action. This is where belief becomes reality. David's hands moved with focus, but his heart remained peaceful. He was not shaken by fear or pressure. He knew that God was with him in that final step. Sometimes in life, we reach moments where decisions must be made, and those decisions shape the outcome of everything ahead. This was David's defining moment. Heaven's timing. Everything in this story happened at the exact right time. Not too early, not too late, but according to God's perfect timing. When David released the stone, it was not random or accidental. It was aligned with heaven's plan for victory. God's timing is always precise, even when we do not understand it. We may feel like delays or setbacks, but they are often preparation. God knows when the moment is right for breakthrough. He sees the entire picture while we only see a small part. That is why trust is so important in our journey of faith. David did not rush ahead or hesitate too long. He moved exactly when God's timing was fulfilled. And in that moment, everything came together perfectly. What looked like chance was actually divine order. Heaven was not watching from a distance, it was actively involved. And the result was victory at the perfect time. The breaking point. Every battle has a breaking point, the moment when everything changes. For David and the giant, that moment came in a single instant. The stone released from the sling carried more than physical force. It carried the authority of faith and the power of God. As it struck, everything shifted in the battlefield. The giant's confidence collapsed instantly. The fear that once ruled the army began to break apart. What seemed unshakable was suddenly brought down. This is how God works in impossible situations. He can break what seems unbreakable. He can change what seems permanent. He can turn defeat into victory in a moment. The breaking point is where human limitation meets divine intervention. And when God steps in, nothing remains the same. That moment changes everything forever. Victory revealed. When Goliath fell to the ground, victory was no longer hidden. It was revealed for all to see. The battlefield that once echoed with fear was now filled with awe and amazement. The impossible had become reality before their very eyes. The smallest man had overcome the greatest giant through faith in God. This victory was not just for David, it was for all of Israel. It reminded them that God fights for his people. It showed that no enemy is greater than the Lord Almighty. The victory belonged to God from the beginning to the end. What people thought was weakness became the greatest strength. What looked like defeat turned into a powerful testimony. Heaven's power was displayed in the most unexpected way, and the name of God was honored through the victory. This moment became a turning point for everyone watching, because when God is involved, victory is always revealed, and no giant can stand against him. A silence after victory. After the giant fell, a deep silence covered the battlefield for a brief moment. It was not the silence of fear anymore, but the silence of shock and wonder. Everyone stood still, trying to understand what had just happened. The giant who once seemed unstoppable was now lying defeated on the ground. No one moved, as if time itself had paused in that moment. The wind passed through the valley, carrying the weight of what had just taken place. The soldiers looked at each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. What they had feared for so long had been overcome in a single moment. This silence was different. It was filled with realization. The realization that God had just done something incredible before their eyes. That moment would never be forgotten by anyone who witnessed it. It was the calm after a powerful storm, a moment where everything changed forever, a moment where fear had been completely broken, and a moment where faith had proven its power. A new confidence. As the silence faded, a new feeling began to rise within the army of Israel. It was not fear, not doubt, but confidence and boldness. Their hearts, once heavy, were now filled with strength and courage. They realized that if God could defeat a giant, nothing was impossible. The victory of David became their victory as well. They were no longer the same people who stood trembling before. Something inside them had changed completely. Faith had replaced fear in their hearts. They stood taller, stronger, and more confident than before. The battle that once seemed impossible now felt already won. They began to move forward with boldness and determination. The same battlefield that once held them back now pushed them forward. God had not only defeated the giant, he had transformed his people. Their confidence was no longer in themselves, but in God, and that confidence would carry them into victory. The power of one life. One person's faith can change everything for everyone. David stood alone at first, but his faith impacted an entire nation. What he did was not just personal, it was powerful for others. Sometimes we think our actions are small and do not matter, but one act of faith can inspire many people. One step of courage can break fear in others. One decision to trust God can create a ripple effect. David did not know how many lives would be impacted that day. He simply chose to trust God in his moment. And that moment became a turning point for many. Your faith can also influence the people around you. You may not see it immediately, but it is happening. People watch how you respond in difficult situations. Your courage can give them strength. Because one life surrendered to God can change everything. Your giant will fall. The story of David and Goliath is not just about the past, it speaks to your life today. You may be facing your own giant right now. It may not be visible, but it feels just as real and just as strong. It could be fear, failure, stress, or something holding you back. At times, it may seem too big to overcome. But just like that day, your giant is not greater than God. What looks impossible to you is possible with him. The same power that gave David victory is still alive today. God has not changed, and his strength has not weakened. Your situation may look difficult, but it is not beyond his control. He sees your struggle and understands your fear. And just like before, He is ready to help you overcome. Your giant will not stand forever. There will come a moment when it falls, and that moment will become your testimony. Keep trusting God. Faith is not just for one moment. It is a journey we must continue every day. David's victory did not mean he would never face challenges again, but it showed him that God would always be with him. In the same way, we must continue to trust God in every situation, not only when things are easy, but also when they are difficult. Trusting God means believing even when we cannot see the outcome. It means holding on even when things feel uncertain. There will be days when your faith is tested, moments when you feel like giving up. But those are the times when you must trust God the most. He is always working, even when you do not see it. He is always present, even when you do not feel it. Your faith will grow stronger as you continue to trust Him. And with each step, you will see His power more clearly. Keep trusting because God never fails. Rise in faith. The story calls us to rise above fear and step into a life of faith. We are not meant to live in doubt or hesitation. We are called to move forward with confidence in God. Just like David stepped onto the battlefield, we must step into our challenges, not with fear, but with faith, not with doubt, but with trust. God has given us everything we need to face what is ahead. We do not have to wait until we feel ready. We only need to be willing. When we choose faith, everything begins to change. Our perspective shifts and our strength increases. We begin to see possibilities instead of problems. We begin to walk with courage instead of fear. This is the life God calls us to live, a life where faith leads the way. God is greater than every giant. In the end, the message is simple but powerful. No matter how big the giant may seem, God is always greater. No matter how difficult the situation, God is always in control. No matter how weak you feel, God's strength is enough for you. This story is a reminder that we are never alone in our battles. God is with us, guiding us, and fighting for us. He sees every struggle and every challenge we face, and He is able to bring victory in ways we cannot imagine. Just like on that battlefield, He can turn fear into faith. He can turn weakness into strength. He can turn defeat into victory. All we need to do is trust Him completely, stand firm, believe, and move forward in faith. Because with God, every giant will fall, and every battle will lead to victory. And so, the story of David and Goliath reminds us of one powerful truth. It was never about the size of the giant. It was always about the greatness of God. When others saw fear, David chose faith. When others stepped back, David stepped forward. And because of that, the impossible became possible. Today, your giant may look different, but the same God is still with you. The same power is still alive, and the same victory is still possible. So don't run from your giant. Stand in faith, trust in God, and watch every giant fall